let's say, placing bets or investing in the space, you have nice macro wind at your back. You have at least a 6x. So challenge in the space isn't necessarily to say, okay, Bitcoin is going up. Bitcoin's going to 200, 300. But I love looking for these asymmetric macro structural changes. And this is the biggest one maybe of all time. You know, you've onboarded literally tens of trillions of dollars of value sitting in global equity accounts that can now just push a button and own Bitcoin. So
in this video interview, two investing giants, Dan Tapiero and Anthony Scaramucci, take us on a journey through what they call the macro case for Bitcoin. Dan Tapiero, founder and managing partner at 10T Holdings, kicks off the interview by describing Bitcoin as the biggest macro opportunity of all time. From there, he briefly touches on the concept of old and new world in regards to investing and explains why he holds absolutely no old world assets. He explains that everything is down 99% relative to Bitcoin, and he expects this trend to continue.
In the last hour, the value of the cryptocurrency has hit an all-time high. The single coin has achieved $69,202 in trading today, breaking its previous record of exactly 1 cent short of $69,000.
Tapiero also discusses the ETFs and explains that the floodgates are not closing anytime soon. Towards the end, Dan and Anthony discuss their price predictions for Bitcoin this cycle, and it is insanely bullish. As the halving approaches and Bitcoin maintains a price above its previous all-time high, Anthony and Dan predict that we could be in for the treat of a lifetime.
This is Bitcoin being produced, this net new Bitcoin coming into supply. But when we hit this halving occur, we're gonna go from 900 to 450. Now what's interesting is right now, there is the equivalent of 9,000 to 10,000 Bitcoin per day in demand. So already we're at 10x more demand than supply. That's this huge price increase that we've seen. So once we go through this halving, if demand stays the same, we may be at 20 to 25x more demand than what the network is producing every single day. And I think that's why people are so bullish on Bitcoin's price.
Let's dive in to hear their unique insight.
But I love looking for these asymmetric macro structural changes. And this is the biggest one maybe of all time, certainly the biggest one I've seen in 30 years. And the macro guy, you're looking for normally changes in liquidity or central bank policy. But in this world, you know, Metcalfe's law is more important than, you know, earnings. And that was also something a little bit difficult for me to switch my mind to. So the network, your 100 million wallets, the growth and development of the network had value itself. And so I made a bunch of different changes all at once, and then I realized, oh my goodness, this is the future. And then I look at how the assets in the old world have performed against assets in the new world. You know, in the last 10 years, of course, you have the S&P 500. It's down 99% against Bitcoin. It's down 99% against Ethereum. The S&P is down 99% even against Ripple, against all of these various, not all of them, but many of the top cryptocurrencies. So it just shows you the value accrual is happening in the new world at the expense, or let's just say relative to the old world. And so for me, it didn't make any sense to have any assets held in the old world anymore.
I went to an event with Dan and I heard his presentation, and I'll never forget this one slide that Dan showed. It was a adoption curve of Bitcoin and adoption curve of digital assets. And he had it at 1998, this is a year ago. And I think you said in that presentation, I remember it very vividly, that there was a 4% adoption. And so if you were tracking it to Web 1, this would be 1998. So just think of what happened to Web 1 from 1998 to 2024. And so I guess, where are we now?
Yeah, maybe 5-6%. Yeah. I mean, the point I think was that in the following 10 years, from 98 to 08, the adoption of the internet grew 6 times. And so if you're, let's say, placing bets or investing in this space, you have nice macro wind at your back. You have at least a 6x, so you're not fighting the other way, right? I think the old world is really contracting on itself. You know, you look at the number of hedge funds, just as an example, I know they manage about $3 trillion, but in the early 90s, it was just a maybe 100 billion or a few, maybe maximum. And so you really want to put yourself in the way of a powerful structural macro change. And in the early 90s, it was alternative asset management. That was a big bull trend. And here, this is the digitization of all value. And I don't know what's bigger than that.
Dan has boldly declared that in his 30-year investment career and in the history of mankind, there's never been an opportunity like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. He calls it the digitization of all wealth. He's in agreement with other industry giants and even TradFi titans like Larry Fink, who have been vocal about the use of cryptocurrency beyond finance and potentially as the rails for the tokenization of all assets. Next, Dan and Anthony discuss the ETFs and give their price predictions for this bull cycle. You do not want to miss this.
Again, macro case for crypto. Dan, what do you see as the biggest macro driver for crypto prices over the next couple months?
I mean, it's easy and sort of boring a little bit. I mean, the ETF, everyone's heard a lot about it, but it's, you've onboarded literally tens of trillions of dollars of value sitting in global equity accounts that can now just push a button and own Bitcoin. So it's as if Coinbase, in effect, overnight, added 100 million MAUs or whatever it is. And I think it's a very powerful trend. It's the first inning of it. I have, many investors, very sophisticated, tens of millions of dollars in my fund. And they've said to me, guys in their 50s, 60s, I'm not going to open up an account on Coinbase or Kraken. I'm just going to wait for the ETF. This is for years they've been saying this. I want to see it in my stock account. I want my broker to look at it. I mean, it's crazy. But it's the American investor's nature. And so I think it continues for a long time. And we haven't seen such anything that's been so concentrated from the demand side. It's like there's like a little bridge, and the entire U.S. wealth management world is trying to cross this little bridge into the new world. So
The halving, and this is prior to the ETF. Do you think we're in like an ADBC situation, meaning where we have the ETF and now Bitcoin will act differently over the forward 14 years? Or do you think it'll have this take on the same?
I don't think it can go up another 99% again.
Well, no, I don't mean it like that. But it typically has gone up like 4x from a halving.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is
it could go up.
It's not gonna have the performance it had from 0 to 14.
Right.
But
right.
What I'm saying, what do you think the impact of the ETF is on the forward fundamentals of Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, it's just a structural up move. So you said 4x is what it is?
Yeah,
so that would be
typically
200,000, 240 from 60 today?
Yeah, 200,000 over the 18 months from the halving.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, if you think about it, it's only, 3-4x? I mean, it's not that big a deal for Bitcoin and certainly for assets in this space.
Yeah.
I mean, historically, it's just the numbers are now getting really big, trillions. Where the space, I think, has a total value, and I look at the space as all the cryptocurrencies plus all the value of all the businesses is around 4.5 trillion. So that's something. I think that's something.
Again,
can it go to 10 trillion? I think
for a
so.
global asset.
Dan predicted in agreement with Scaramucci that the entire cryptocurrency market cap could go as high as $10 trillion this cycle, predicting that Bitcoin will peak around 4x its value on the day of the halving. Traditionally, the bull run begins after the halving, but this time Bitcoin has set a new all-time high weeks before the halving.
All right, so Bitcoin set to undergo yet another halving event, probably sometime in the next month. And you got to take a look at this because it rallied like huge after the last one. This, I think, will be the fourth one to bring a pop investment.
Many experts attribute this to the ETF and explain that this cycle will be like nothing we've ever seen. Dan and Anthony are a little more conservative, owing to their backgrounds as hedge fund managers, but even conservatively, they predict Bitcoin will 4x from its value at the halving. In essence, both men think Bitcoin could touch between 280,000 and 300,000 USD per coin before the end of this cycle, a truly monster price prediction. Dan has also advised that unexposed investors should at the very least get off zero and find ways to gain some exposure to the asset class. He's also made the case for completely forsaking the old world assets and embracing in entirety the new. But what do you think about Dan and Anthony's bullishness? To see the latest in crypto news, watch this video here.